Good evening, and thank you very much for having me. When we first started, Tim thanked the wonderful folks in the business community here, the great people who run this theater. I think we need to take a moment to remember that a festival like this, if it goes well, is sort of like a nice dinner party. You walk in, everything's set, interesting people, good dinner, everything just show and you leave. The fact is, it takes an awful lot of hard work to put these things together, and let's take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous hard work and continuing work of the people who work for McMinimans who have made this possible for us. As Tim said, the topic of my talk tonight is the so-called Rendlesham Forest Incident, alternately known as the Bentwaters Incident or the Bentwaters-Woodbridge Incident. To say that this is an important case is an understatement. Outside of this country, it is seen as one of the very most significant incidents in the history of UFO study. I think here, a little bit less so because it didn't happen here. And we're kind of funny like that. The fact of the matter, though, is it involves citizens of this country in a very profound way. The incident occurred in and around two of the most highly secured NATO facilities in the United Kingdom, RAF Woodbridge, RAF Bentwaters, both in Suffolk, East Anglia, a very rural, very beautiful area, about 70 miles northeast of London. In late December of 1980, a series of events occurred over 3 nights in Suffolk between Christmas and New Year's that were so profound in their implications that had the real nature of what had occurred in those forests, that field, in and around those 2 bases, ever been made public, it would have changed profoundly the relationship that then existed between the United States and Great Britain, as well as the way we see ourselves in the universe. Obviously, that didn't happen, which is pretty much always the case. But it did change the way that people in Great Britain, in Europe, and beyond see the UFO story and the level of seriousness that it is now taken with in Great Britain. A little bit of the backstory first. As Tim had said, I began my research when I was 3 years old. I'm 28 now. Thank you. And after 10 or 11 years, I was seriously looking for a project that I could sink my teeth into for a book. I was aspiring as a writer. I'd had some articles published. I had a lot of dreams of making a mark in this field, as some of you may have. And in 1987, the summer of 1987, the 40th anniversary of the incidents that kicked this off, I attended a conference in Washington, D.C., sponsored by MUFON, where I was a panelist on a discussion about the abduction phenomena, basically rooted in my work with Bud Hopkins and some of his colleagues. And there was a speaker there who interested me tremendously. His name was Larry Warren. And I knew who he was because he had become a kind of public figure in the field in 1983, at first under a pseudonym and then under his own name shortly after, as somebody who alleged that he was not just an eyewitness to the most astounding part of these 3 days and 3 nights of events, but that he was the whistleblower, who was the individual who had gotten this information public. And it's funny, I remember sitting in that hall in American University, listening and saying to myself, either this guy is one of the most courageous people I've ever met, or he's one of the most reckless and naive people I have ever met. Larry's not naive, but he is headstrong, he is heroic, and he took some risks that one person in 1,000 would. When we say the term whistleblower, some of us think of somebody like Karen Silkwood, who in trying to expose the tremendous abuses in Kerr-McGee, the corporation that was basically radioactively poisoning a number of its employees, and Karen died in a quote-unquote mysterious car accident on her way to an interview with a New York Times reporter, we usually think of that level of the game. Whistleblowers are not like us, and I say it after studying them as a kind of particular character type. They actually believe that the world should work properly, that people should keep their word, that people should be treated with respect, and that institutions should safeguard the rights of the individuals that serve them. Larry was a young volunteer at the time, a 19-year-old in the United States Air Force stationed in England, with specialty training in anti-terrorist activity, as well as working around nuclear ordnance. Now, by the time he had finished speaking, I knew I wanted to speak to this guy privately, whether or not this was the root of a book or that it would be a heck of an interview. We chatted the next day in the hall, and I was taken aback at how quickly he agreed to the interview. In fact, he was at my apartment in Manhattan the very next weekend, and that recorder ran for about 5 or 6 hours. He let me ask him any questions I wanted, gave me permission to use any of the material that he had put on that tape without any kind of payment, and put some things on the record that he had not talked about in the public forum the week before. By Sunday evening, I was a little wary. Why had he laid all this information out for me? And he said, frankly, I heard you on that panel discussion, and I know you're not terribly well known in the field. I know you've never written a book, but I think you're the guy that I want to write a book with. My terms are these. As long as I get to say what happened to me, what I saw, what happened to me as a result of what I saw, and discuss some of the other incidents I've had in my life that are non-standard, to put it mildly, you are not only free to pursue any research you wish to support my claims, you are free to disprove me. I am going to turn over every bit of paperwork I have, whether it's my high school report card, all my military records that I possess, most of which I do not possess, and which are now classified. Here is the phone number of my mother. My life is an open book to you. It did not strike me as the claim of somebody who was lying or exaggerating their involvement in an incident to go on the record like that. It would have been a pretty schizophrenic book if I had proved him to not be telling the truth, and he's spending half the book saying, this happened to me, and I'm spending the other half of the book saying, this didn't happen to him, and here's why. But I did, and I have to tell you here, I had no idea of what I was getting into. None at all. In my mind, I thought, well, here's something we can devote a year, maybe a year and a half or two to. We should probably go back to England. That'd be a good idea to make us look more serious as researchers as well. And we'll get the book published. It'll be a bestseller. We'll sell it for a movie. George Clooney will play me, and I'll be famous and have millions of girlfriends, and life will go on. Well, life doesn't always work out as it does in our dreams. What was going to be a year to 2 years, one trip to England and a couple of $1,000s, became 9 years. Between the two of us, 15 trips to England at our own expense, bankruptcy for both of us, and ultimately a bestseller that changed the way that people think about this subject all over the United Kingdom. And for that, I am eternally proud. We're going to look at some slides, and if we have a chance, we're going to look at some video footage. The book itself looks like this. It's a big fat 500-page book. If you have a pet cat, do not drop this on the cat. It will hurt it very badly. It reads in some places like fiction, but I have to tell you, my name and reputation is attached to it. Everything is fully documented, and most of the things in several respects. It opens and closes like a legal brief, because you are the judge and jury on this incident. Many people have already passed on it as a case that would, if such things were brought to court of law, be the case that could crack this wide open. Let's face it, the seminal UFO incident case legend in the world is Roswell. I don't think there's a case more important. However, we're dealing with an incident that is more than 50 years past, and as Stan Friedman says, we're kind of racing the undertaker here. Most of the individuals involved, directly or indirectly, have already passed on or certainly advancing age. These events I'm going to describe to you took place in 1980. Literally all of the principals are involved. If, and it won't happen under this administration, we were to have another and properly conducted congressional investigation of the UFO question, many of the witnesses who are named in this book could be subpoenaed and would testify. Also, Tim had mentioned when he first brought me up here that I'm here courtesy of the Sci-Fi Channel. What does Sci-Fi have to do with UFO reality? The Sci-Fi Channel is a media company. Their sister companies is the USA Network and Universal Studios, and they are going through a bit of a change right now. Somewhere along the line, they decided that maybe they should do some programming for that funny bit, the group of subjects that sci-fi is based on, because the fi is often rooted in reality. And I'm proud to say that as of 6 weeks ago, the network was given the go-ahead to produce a feature-length 2-hour documentary on the Rendlesham Forest Incident that will be aired this October. And partly as a result of that, they were kind enough to sponsor me to be here with you in truly one of my favorite states in the Union. And I'm very happy to be back in Oregon. So, to the slides, Randy. How about one of mine? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I've had, pardon? Yes, if you would. Let's dim the front lights. Okay, Larry Warren is a guy who was born in New York City. A very fine family as far as I'm concerned. I've met many of his relatives. His mom is one of my favorite people in the world. Catholic background, raised with the right values, joined the service for the right reasons, and because there was a chance to go to England where he had done a year in his high school schooling. He loved England. He's also a big Beatle fan and knew that he could get cheaper tickets to the Who by being stationed in England than in the States. At the time, you could actually still request your country of posting. He was, I think, the very last individual before they changed the policy. And this is a picture of Larry in Texas in basic training in the summer of 1980. Next, please, Randy. Okay, to set the location, this is a pretty much a basic grid map of England. You've got the top of Scotland. We'll cut off there, but we don't really need it. Okay. That big blue dot gives you an idea of the area where this happened, and that covers Suffolk, East Anglia. Reminds me, though, that when we first did this talk after this book came out, our first venue was Gulf Breeze, Florida, and it was very exciting to actually do a talk with a book for the first time. And after it was over, a very nice gentleman came over to Larry and asked, very respectfully, Mr. Warren, that big blue dot there on the map that you showed? He said, yeah. He said, the UFO was that big? It was not that big. Next, please. Okay, closing in on a bit, you see the twin base complexes of RAF Woodbridge, RAF Bentwaters, about 6 miles in from the English Channel right here. And again, we're about 70 miles northeast of London, as this map indicates. Next, please. And yet another one. This really brings us into where the action is. At the very top here, you see RAF Bentwaters with its main runway, its classified runways. We actually saw an SR-71 at Blackbird that you guys now have to keep the Spruce Goose Company. When they were still classified at high performance conditions, it was the most remarkable terrestrial thing I have ever seen in the air, and was probably over the coast of New York about 40 minutes later. Now, the area that's penciled in green here is the Rendlesham Forest. One thinks of England, one thinks of history, mythology, all kinds of wonderful, mysterious stuff, fabulous forests filled with who knows what. This is not one of those romantic old 8th century forests. This is a forest that's about 100 years old, that was created purely for logging purposes, but is a good thick forest, and actually separates the twin bases by about 5 miles. Now, RAF Woodbridge here has the longest runway in all